Let's head back out to Caroline Shoba, who's on the ground in Greece. Caroline, so we've got a really tight timeline ahead of us.
Yeah, you mentioned some very important points here, Louise. I want to continue the discussion about what these elections mean for the Greek economy with Miranda Xafa. She's the CEO of EF Consulting. She's also a former board member to the IMF. Thank you so much for coming to speak to us today. So one of my previous guests actually said that yesterday's vote was a little exaggerated. It was a little emotional. What do you make of yesterday's vote?
Well, Greek people are angry at the two big parties, New Democracy and Pasok, that have governed Greece for about 4 decades and got the country into this mess. So these two parties do not have enough votes to form a stable coalition and implement the reform program. But at the same time, the parliament has become significantly more fragmented with 3 new parties in parliament, 2 far-right parties and 1 left-wing party, all of which reject austerity measures and want to either renegotiate or abrogate the second rescue package.
Miranda, let's stick with that point, because surely the EU and the IMF, they must realize that with the tough austerity measures, they've driven this country into one of the deepest recessions that the developed world has seen. Do you think, against this backdrop, the new coalition will actually have a chance to renegotiate some of the terms?
Well, first of all, let's make clear that many of the structural reform measures under the program were not implemented. Otherwise, unemployment would not have reached 21% if the labor market had become a little bit more flexible earlier on. And secondly, recession is inevitable in a country that has been consuming excessively with borrowed money for decades. Having said that, the IMF has signaled that it will not continue disbursements unless the reform program is implemented. And as for the EU, if they do disburse, it will be in a special account which is earmarked for debt service. So it will be very difficult for Greece to default.
So what you're implying here is that the IMF may choose to cancel one of the payments, and we know that Greece is already behind in terms of paying its bills. What does that mean for Greece? It essentially pushes it on the verge of bankruptcy.
Well, there are already 8 billion euros worth of arrears to suppliers and to exporters who are waiting for their VAT refunds. And if the disbursements are delayed, this is set to rise, and that will just deepen the recession because liquidity in the economy will become more scarce. But if the government runs out of cash, that will be a wake-up call for politicians, because debt service will continue to be paid, but wages and salaries might not.
You say it's a wake-up call, but, I mean, it may already be too late then. Does it essentially mean that if Greece is bankrupt, it will automatically be ejected from the Eurozone?
No, that will not automatically happen. And of course, it all depends on how patient Greece's creditors are likely to be. If the country is dragged into a new election, I think there is a clear risk that they will run out of cash. And then whether the EU is willing to provide some bridge financing remains to be seen.
Miranda, thank you so much for your insights today. It'll be a riveting next couple of days to see what kind of a coalition government can be formed. On that note, Louisa, back over to you. I'll be back with more updates later in the show.
Thank you very much, Caroline. Appreciate it.